Right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Albright. My name is Jamie Fraser. I'm the director here at the Albright. It is fabulous to welcome you here today. A lot of people who I've never met before. Always great to welcome some new faces here as well. Please come through. There's some more chairs down the front if you want something as well. Before I introduce the events today, I'll just run through briefly the next two events we're holding at the Albright. If you want to know our fall, or as an Australian undercover, as an American autumn program looks like, it looks like this. You can get one digitally by signing up to our email list, or you can take one as a handout, which is over on the top of that cabinet of sherds over there. And that'll also give you the email on where to join up if you want to be part of the Albright community. The next two lectures are, we've got one on Wednesday, the 29th of October. That's also a book launch at our usual Wednesday 5 p.m. slot. And that is with Rodney Ace of St. George College. Rodney, who's launching his book, Walking the Jerusalem Circuit in the Footsteps of Pilgrims Before the Crusades. Now we're toying with the idea of doing this one out in the courtyard. So if you're coming, make sure you bring a jacket just in case. And then our next event is November the 12th. This is a panel sort of presentation. It's joint between the Albright and the American Schools of Overseas Research in the States. That's American archaeology through the lens of Albright's work at Tel Beit Mersim. That's presenters including Igor Kramerman and Michael Freckman at Hebrew University, and virtually joining them will be Rachel Haller at the State University of New York. Now, because that's a joint lecture between the Albright and AIAR, that means we've got to be able to do it at a time when even Californians can dial in. We love you, California, we love you. So the format for that is a little different. Normally our format is 5 o'clock for the lecture with catering to follow. This is slightly different. If you're coming on November the 12th, turn up at 6:30, wine, food, and then if you've drunk enough wine, you can snooze through the lecture, which starts at 7:30. That's got all the details for our entire program, should you want it. It is, thank you. It is a real pleasure to always launch a book, particularly when it's a book written by one of our long-standing associate fellows, and that is, of course, Dr. Susan Weingarten. Susan is, well, first of all, the book. The book is Ancient Jewish Food in its Geographical and Cultural Contexts, or with the best subtitle ever, What's Cooking in the Talmuds, published with Routledge. There is one kindly donated by the author that will sit in the Albright Library. And I have it on good authority, there's not one but two in the AIAR library as well. However, if you want your very own copy and can afford the Routledge prices, and I say this as having published through Routledge myself, or I couldn't afford my own book for at least 6 months, you can do so through their website or through Amazon. It is cheaper for the online version, or hold your breath and wait for it to come out in paperback, unless James Cameron picks up the film rights, when I'm sure its price will increase. Susan is a long-standing associate fellow here at the Albright Institute. She is a food historian, a Jerusalem resident, and of course, the author of books including The Saint's Saint, Hagiography and Geography in Jerome, published in 2005, and Haroset, A Taste of Jewish History, which she published in 2019. Now, being a book launch, we're doing it slightly different from a standard lecture. Susan will make a presentation, and then we have two respondents. The first is Dr. Limor Yungman. Limor is a postdoc fellow at Tel Aviv University, where she's also a food historian. She's speaking From Stomach to Heart, 1,000 Years of Arabic Culinary Literature. And she'll be followed by Dr. Yuval Shahar. Yuval is retired from the Department of Jewish History at Tel Aviv University, speaking on the rise and fall of the endive as a plant food. Yuval is a historian, the other two are food historians. I think we can classify them all as food historians, really. And I've been wondering what the collective noun of a group of food historians is. I think it has to be a platter. So at that, please welcome the first in our platter, Susan.
Thank you very much, Jamie. The Babylonian Talmud tells a story of what happened after the destruction of the temple when the rabbis took refuge in the little town of Yavne. And the first thing they did when they arrived there was to thank their hosts. So I would like to thank Jamie and Shua and everybody at the Albright, not only for arranging this launch of my book, but also for being a refuge for many different scholars in these troubled times. I'm now going to start to talk about the subject. Oh, there's my bits and pieces of my book. When I tried to work out which bit of the book to present to you today, I decided that I'd take the last chapter, because if anybody had had a look at it, they'd probably never got there. So I'm going to be talking today about food and power, the view from the table. First of all, the text that I use. After all, as Jamie pointed out, I'm a historian. The Jewish texts in Eretz Yisrael, which is what the rabbis called the land of Israel, Provincia Palestina, which is what the Romans called it. We have texts which are both legal and narrative. The Mishnah from the 3rd century, the Palestinian or Jerusalem Talmud from the 4th to 5th, and other documents, Midrashim, which are also both legal and narrative. In Bavel, Jewish Babylonia, Mesopotamia, what's nowadays mostly Iran, we have the Babylonian Talmud, which is the basis of present-day Judaism. From the 5th to 7th century, the successors of the Babylonian rabbis, the Gaonim, and some more Midrashim, but rather less of them. Just in case it's not totally clear where Jewish Babylonia is, I've produced, my son produced a map for me with an arrow, which points to a vague area, because there's debate as to what the area of settlement really was. Non-Jewish texts. First of all, the Greco-Roman texts. We're very lucky indeed that the one Roman cookery book that has survived, named after the gourmet Apicius, is in its present state from the 4th century, in other words, contemporary with the beginning of the Jerusalem Talmud. We have literary Greco-Roman texts, people who wrote a book called The Philosophers at Dinner, Pliny, and plenty of others. There are also medical texts. The 3rd century author Galen in Asia Minor talks a lot about food. There is a single Middle Persian text called King Khusro and His Boy. Khusro was a king of kings, around the 6th century. And in this document, he interviews a boy to see whether he'd be suitable for a position at court, and to see whether he knows what are the best foods. He also talks about perfumes and things like that, but there are lists and lists and lists. Which is the best bird? Which is the best four-legged animal, and so on. And finally, we have the first Arabic cookery book from Baghdad of the Caliphs, written by Al-Warraq, the Kitab al-Tabikh, which just means a cookery book, from around the time of the Geonim. So the Talmudic picture. The Talmuds show us Jews living within a surrounding major culture. They show us the community leaders, the Nasi, the Patriarch in Palestine, the Resh Galuta, the Exilarch in Babylonia. And relationships between the Patriarch and Roman authorities and the Exilarch and Persian authorities are expressed symbolically as relationships between leaders. There are stories about Rabbi Judah the Patriarch. He was the rabbi and is sometimes called just Rabbi, and a apparent personal relationship with Antoninus, the Roman emperor. Now, Antoninus is the name of a whole dynasty of Roman emperors, and people have spent a long time trying to work out what exactly. Naturally, it's my family that come in late. Trying to work out which emperor it was. And similarly, in Babylonia, the Rav, the Babylonian Jewish religious leader, is portrayed as having a personal relationship with the Persian king. And elsewhere, the secular Jewish leader, the Exilarch, is similarly paired off with the Sassanian kings. And I think none of these are to be taken literally. It's just symbolic that you have a single figure that you're talking about. So what were relationships between Greeks and later Romans with the Persians? I think this is expressed very nicely in this Greek drinking cup. You'd fill the cup with wine and then drain it, and then you'd see the beautiful picture. And it's a picture of a Greek soldier menacing a Persian who is lower than him and therefore lower on the scale. Persian, note he's wearing stripy pajamas. This will become important in a minute. So the Greek literature also takes plenty of opportunities to satirize what they saw as the Persian excessively luxurious way of life, especially when it came to food. And at the other end of the food spectrum, and I hasten to add here that I wrote this chapter long before Spartans became a point of modern politics. The Spartans are satirized for their dreadful food, the disgusting black broth. And again, people have spent time trying to work out why the broth was black. Was this because it was made of black lentils, or was it made with blood? And the satire of the Spartans carries on to the 21st century. My grandson very kindly provided me with this picture from his copy of Asterix. I do apologize that the text is all in Hebrew, but for some reason, the Israel National Library doesn't have an English or French text of Asterix. So let's have a look and see what Herodotus makes of this. Herodotus, the 5th century BCE historian, tells a story of a war between Greece and Persia, where the Greeks did much better. They usually did. And the Persian king Xerxes has to flee, leaving all his possessions behind. And he took an enormous number of possessions, even when he was on campaign. So the Spartan general, Pausanias, as a joke, tells the Persian slave chef, chefs were often slaves, to make a typical king's dinner with all the paraphernalia around, the gold plates, the silk couches, and so on. And then he gets his own Spartan slaves to produce a Spartan dinner. presumably with the notorious black broth, although Herodotus doesn't mention it. Obviously, it didn't need to be even mentioned. So he then calls in the Greek generals to see the two dinners, and he says to them, look how ridiculous it is for the Persians to come and attack the Greeks when they've so little to gain for it. So Greek and Roman rivalry with Persia was expressed at the table at least from the 5th century BCE. I brought you here what I think is a very beautiful picture of a drinking horn in gold and silver, which is on the cover of Jamie's book. I'm giving you a plug. And in this situation, in the rivalry at the table, the city and its banquets became a stage for polemic between the two powers. There was visible, conspicuous consumption. People were seen to eat incredibly expensive and fancy foods, and which underlined their displays of power. And we started in the 5th century BCE. Theophylact Simokata was a Byzantine historian about over 1,000 years later, but he still produces the same line. He still talks about the king, and this is another Khusro, who had gold dishes for serving things on, and he lists all the fantastic foods, including things from royal hunts, including choice cuts of gazelle, and then adds his comment, and anything else that is preserved for the festive table of gluttonous tyrants. Makes it quite clear what he thinks. When we're talking about rabbinic literature, we have to also, I think, note that there are traces of Greek satire of Persians in the biblical book of Esther. Esther is a Jewish story set in Persia, and it has been said that it's actually written in a Greek satirical mode, and it includes no less than 10 banquets. It's a very short book. So I want to move now to looking at the patriarch and the emperor in Provincia Palestina. And here I want to show how the actual food on their tables reflects their status. First of all, I'll talk about imported foods and then about out-of-season food. So we begin with the artichoke. You can see how long ago I took that picture, because it's a long time since artichokes have cost 6 shekels. The Aramaic name for the artichoke, kinras, clearly comes from the Greek kinara. And Pliny writes about artichokes very disapprovingly. They were incredibly expensive. They were imported from the furthest ends of the emperor, and all they're doing there is to encourage gluttony. And he disapproves of the enormous efforts that people have gone to interfere with nature, and so that there should be no day without an artichoke. Artichokes appear as first course in a mosaic. Can you see them? At the top of the silver plate. These are artichokes. In a mosaic from Antioch from the 3rd to 4th century, the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud. And if Antioch in Syria isn't near enough to Palestine or the land of Israel for you, then there are also artichokes in a mosaic from the 3rd to 4th century, from the 3rd to 4th century in Jerusalem. And this is what the excavator identified as a tree, not a very good tree, Zeb Weiss said, but I think it's in fact a rather good artichoke. And I've brought you an 18th century picture that shows just what I mean, that shows that this really does look like an artichoke. It's from Sepphoris in Galilee. So Rabbi Judah the Patriarch gets imported artichokes. The Babylonian Talmud tells us that he was sent a large number of artichokes from a long way away by a rich man. And here, in accepting these imported artichokes, Rabbi is behaving like a Roman aristocrat. He's echoing aristocratic behavior. Moving on to snake melons, the Latin cucumeres or the Aramaic kishuin. Pliny and Columella both tell us that the Emperor Tiberius had out-of-season cucumeres, snake melons, grown for him under glass, so he could enjoy them summer and winter. And kishuin, snake melons, appeared on the table of Rabbi and Antoninus. They were never lacking from their table, winter or summer, rain or shine. Today, I think we've forgotten how important seasonality was in the ancient world. Could be that these cucumeres were not grown under glass for Rabbi, but were in fact pickled, and I brought you what has been identified as a pickled cucumber from Pompeii. Moving now to Babylonia and the Exilarch and the King of Kings, I'm going to look first at exotic food, then hunted food, and then raw food. So the exotic Persian foods I've already mentioned that appear in this Middle Persian document, King Khusro and his boy. And they discuss the best foods for the King of Kings, including duck, gazelle eaten raw, and etrog, citron. All these are noted also on the table of the Exilarch. Hunted foods, it was famous that the Persian king engaged in hunting. He hunted lions, but he also hunted gazelles and edible things. And on this 6th century silver plate, Persian plate, we can see him doing it. The I better hurry up because I'm running out of time. The Babylonian Talmud relates 2 episodes of bringing a hunted gazelle to the Exilarch on a Jewish festival. And you can see again another drinking horn in the shape of a gazelle, which seems sadly to have lost its horns. Palestinian rabbis note Babylonian customs of eating raw meat. Umtsa, they call it. Attitudes change. At first, they're neutral, but later they seem to have taken up the Roman attitude that this is barbarian. Raw food for the Romans was barbarian. The cultured Persians with their fancy chefs are really barbarians. And Athenaeus presents the Greco-Roman civilized way of eating food, cut up into bite-sized pieces and eaten from tiny tables, as opposed to the Persians who roast animals whole. And he even accuses the Persians of eating a whole roast camel. Now, the Persian on a camel was an archetype of the barbarian, as we can see from this Greek vase, where the Persian in his stripy pajamas is seated between the 2 humps of the camel. And when it comes to the etrog, the citron fruit, there are descriptions in the Babylonian Talmud of cutting them up for the Exilarch and for the king. And we saw that they were part of the list of the best food in Khusro's court. And there are lots of recipes in Arab cookery books which include etrog. So to sum up, the banquet is a stage for polemic. The Roman emperor and the Sassanian king of kings used banquets and feasting as part of their competing shows of power. And then there's a sort of trickle down to the relations between the Jewish patriarch and the exilarch in the Palestinian and Babylonian Talmuds. So the rivalry between Jewish Palestine and Jewish Babylonia echoes rivalry between Greece and Rome and Persia. And I brought you a chart that expresses this. I can't finish without some recipes. Well, after all, we're talking about food. These are recipes for snake melons in the Apicius collection, 3 recipes. I haven't tried them out. I missed the season of the snake melons in Machane Yehuda. They didn't seem to have any. Oh, Joel tells me that I might have just missed the stand. I hope next year to actually be able to try them out, though, or maybe without the boiled brains. Thank you.
So good evening. First of all, hot, warm or hot? What you? Congratulations for the book. It is a beautiful book. You have to read it. So, the rise and fall of the endive as a plant food. The biblical laws of Shevi'it or Shemitah, developed by the rabbis of the Talmud, banned working the land every 7th year in Israel, the land of Israel. These laws were among the most important, difficult, and challenging of all the mitzvot laws dependent on the produce of the land of Israel. From a culinary point of view, the restrictions on this cultivation of the land and the use of its product dramatically reduced the list of foods available for eating in the 7th year. One of the more effective ways of overcoming these restrictions was extending the use of wild plants that are usually not part of the human diet. The rabbis of the land of Israel thus had to decide how far the halakha, the religious regulations, applied to specific wild plants during the 7th year. In the next few moments, we shall follow the fate of the endive as a plant food. Where is the... There are 2 sorts of endive mentioned in the Talmudic literature: Olshin Hagina, the cultivated endive, and plain Olshin, the wild endive. The first of these is also called entubin, from the Greek entybion. The modern scientific name is Cicorium intybus, and also troximon. Troximon in Greek generally relates to a vegetable that is eaten raw, but in the Talmudic literature designates especially the cultivated endive. The second sort is called simply olshin in Hebrew or oltin in Aramaic. In both cases, it is the leaves of the plant that are eaten. They were and are very similar to each other, and that is why they may be grown together, as they are not considered different species for the laws of Kilaim, species which are banned from being grown together. The Mishnah tells us that the 7th year restrictions were indeed applied also to the wild endive. As I said, there is an important general principle with regard to the produce of the sabbatical year. Anything that is food for men or animals, the law of the produce of the sabbatical year is applied both to it and to its money substitute. Which plants are they? The leaves of the wild arum, the leaf of dandana, endives, leeks, purslane, and netzach halav. Food for animals, thorns, and thistles. All the plants mentioned here are wild plants, so it is clear that the endive mentioned here must be the wild endive. The Jerusalem Talmud tells us that the leader of the Jewish community in the land of Israel, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Judah the Patriarch, known simply as Rabbi, attempted to cancel the sabbatical year. Rabbi asks Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, the most important of the Hasidim, Pietist rabbis at that time, what is happening to the grain in the field. But Rabbi Pinchas answers that it is possible to survive on eating wild endive. Rabbi Judah, the Patriarch, wanted to cancel the sabbatical year. Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair came up to him. He said to him, Rabbi Pinchas, how is the grain doing in the field? He answered him, wild endives are good. He said to him, how is the grain doing? Once again, he answered him, wild endives are good. From this, Rabbi understood that he did not agree with him. The source reflects the rise of the endive to the top of the diet through the 7th year, as the equivalent of the grain in a regular year. However, a little later, the status of the endive begins to fall. Rabbi turns his tactics towards the slow erosion of the regulations of the sabbatical year. A significant step in this direction is Rabbi's permission to import vegetables from abroad into the land of Israel in the 7th year. There we have stated in Mishnah Nedarim, someone who vows to abstain from vegetables, he is permitted field vegetables because these have an additional name. We have stated on that in Tosefta Nedarim, he who makes a vow to abstain from vegetables in the sabbatical year is also forbidden field vegetables. So there is a control. Rabbi Crispa stated the reason in the name of Rabbi Hananiah ben Gamliel. That means as long as Rabbi Judah the Patriarch did not permit importing vegetables from abroad into the land of Israel. But since Rabbi permitted importing vegetables from abroad into the land of Israel, there is no difference between the 7th sabbatical year and the remaining years of the sabbatical cycle. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says endives are important enough to become impure as food in the 7th year. That means as long as Rabbi did not permit imports. But since he permitted them, there is no difference between the 7th year and the remaining years of the sabbatical cycle. The import of vegetables from abroad through the sabbatical year would have significantly enriched the potential diet of Jews in the land of Israel in these crucial years, and they would no longer be dependent for survival on the wild endive. Indeed, from this time, we find that references to the endive are henceforth almost exclusively to the cultivated one, entubion or troximon, and the wild olesh or tin disappears almost completely from Talmudic discussions, and its voice is silenced. Finally, I brought you two recipes for endives, an ancient one from a Roman cookery book contemporary with the Jerusalem Talmud, and a modern traditional recipe for diet, an herb delicacy prepared nowadays from wild endive leaves. Oh, so this is that one. Roman recipe of Apicius. Endives in tubai and lettuces remedy the bitterness of endive with a dressing of liquamen, fish sauce, a little oil, and chopped onion. Or instead of lettuce, in winter, serve endive in a dipping sauce or with honey and sharp vinegar. A modern Arab diet rinse wild endive and throw. What is written? Throw. Ah, here I think. The modern chop leaves and add to boiling water for a few minutes, then drain. Fry a chopped onion in another pan with olive oil. Squeeze endive leaves and add to onion and fry briefly. Season with salt and pepper. Now, the last. This will enrich your diet in all years, not just the sabbatical year. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Okay, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Susan for the invitation and for Jimmy and Shua for the welcoming. And I would like to also join Yuval's congratulations for a wonderful book that I all recommend reading. I took a task to speak in 10 minutes about 1,000 years. It is a mission, but I will try to keep up and we'll see how much we do. And so as food historians, the biggest challenge is sources, and especially for a source that is perishable like food. Luckily, I'm researching the cookbooks, so you'll see, and we can know through them what was really in the dishes that are sometimes described in other sources. So cookbooks in Arabic is the largest collection of cookbooks in one language, the oldest as well, from 10th to 15th century. And they're coming in, as you can see, starts in Baghdad. We'll see later, I will come into the details. Aleppo and Damascus, Cairo, and also two cookbooks from North Africa and Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. But where did it all start? This is, by the way, a map that was created for an exhibition that I created with at the Museum of Islamic Art 2 years ago. And so here it all began in Baghdad. It was built in 762, and it's where it all started, the culture of writing cookbooks. And well, originally, Baghdad was built as a round city. It's called the round city of Baghdad. And the structure of it is also reflecting this holistic viewpoint of the world. Food was an important part of it for the body, for the medicine, and the cycle of life. And it was more than just food beyond substance. It was not just to nutrition yourself. It's also to feed yourself. It's also for culture. And you see how it went. So writing cookbooks was part of an activity, a leisure activity of the elites, the urban classes, and the caliphs. It was part of a bibliophilic culture. Here we see, it's in Basra. It's not cookbooks, but this is how scholars studied, and these are books. Inside you see in the piled up behind the figures. And this is how they learned. They liked calligraphy, the beauty of the object as well, not just the text themselves. So food was not only cooked or eaten, it was just a status symbol, and through the cookbooks. And the caliphs and their entourage, their companions, wrote or compiled cookbooks for themselves. They had big libraries where they kept also cookbooks. And they also did cooking competitions, which was part of the another example for what was gastronomic activity. They would gather, the caliph and his friends and his companions. They would cook a dish separately. They would pick a passerby from the street to taste and judge the food, really like a master chef today. What? Ken. Yeah. And now, so here I got into to resume everything. We talk about now we have today. It's a small portion of what is left today from a much bigger collection of cookbooks from 10th century, Ibn Sa'ad al-Warraq that Susan is using in her book from the earliest, the 10th century, and goes on all the way to the 15th, 16th century, Syria, and you see that it accumulates to over 4,000 recipes. And how did they look like? So we can talk about many things, but the authors are sometimes anonymous. Yeah, the authority of cookbooks is not like today. Yeah, we have chefs writing their own cookbooks. It's sometimes they copy each other, but it's not the same author. And how did they look like? So this is one example. It's one of the oldest manuscripts held today in Helsinki Library. And you can see, and whoever reads Arabic can see that sometimes there are no diacritic points. It's really hard to, and also decipher it in order to understand the recipe itself, right? And sometimes there's no distinction between, here you can see there's a title above, etc. But the point is that it's, yeah, and sometimes it's completely damaged, so it's a challenge. But luckily, we have, like the researchers that work on it, we have comparison with other copies to complete the picture. And on the other end of the story, we have another example of the most ornated cookbook that was commissioned. It was ordered for an Ottoman Sultan in 15th century. Mehmed Fateh, he's a well-known Sultan, and you can see that it's in like framework in gold. The recipe title is in gold. Yeah, so it shows that how do you use it? Do you really cook with it? This kind of cookbook, not really. Yeah, so it's really becoming a status symbol. Another feature of these cookbooks is it was not just an assembly of recipes that we sometimes write our own cookbooks at home. It was really structured, and it had its own, at the entrance, it has like an introduction and table of contents. Yeah, this is the list of chapters, and it has a logic behind it. It's one example. Another example, it could look like this. They're using few systems of, this is also interesting to look behind what are the systems of, is it numerized, is it written in the numbers in letters, etc. That's another story. And another feature is that cookbooks were not strictly only food recipes. We had, this is one example of Al-Warraq, and we see that it has tips for successful cooking, properties of food by the temperaments of the humors, the Galenic theory. We have topics on food and medicine, then a big portion, hundreds of, tens of, of chapters about recipes for dishes and sweets, recipes for medicinal dishes, drinks and syrups. This is quite rare. Not all cookbooks feature drinks. Perfumed powders and toothpicks. And as Susan was mentioning, yeah, it's part of the banquet. You need to wash your hands after. There's a big ceremony behind this. It's a logic. And then table etiquette and post-meal sleep. And it is recommended, by the way, to sleep after eating. So it's already, back then, you already thought about it. So what can historic, if you have 5 minutes what can historic cookbook tell us about other cuisines or various cuisines? And I would start with actually the Prophet Muhammad's favorite sweet. And it's mentioned in the hadith in the saying of the Prophet. And it's hais. It's called hais or hais. It depends of the pronunciation. But it's basically date balls like we do today, right? And so it's made of dry select bread and biscuit cake, dry dates, walnut, almonds, pistachios, toasted sesame seeds, sesame oil, which was quite expensive and used a lot in sweets, and pounded sugar that also really marks it as an elite food. And again, the Prophet Muhammad, did he really eat all these things? Probably not, because if we think about the context, but it's taken and is receiving from the local, it's becoming luxurious through these pistachios and sugar, etc. That's one example. Another example is Makabib al-Yahud, and this is taken from a 14th century Egyptian cookbook, and the meatballs of the Jews. What makes it Jewish, right? Or it is perceived as Jewish? Yeah, it doesn't mean that the Jews wrote it, or it was. But then it said lean meat after pounding fine, and then remove the tendons. Perhaps this is the point. Yes, this is where it's coming. Yes, but the rest is very local, as Susan was just saying. Yeah, it's exactly that. It's reflecting local practices of using Chinese cinnamon, pepper. It's also very expensive. Parsley and meat is more local. Well, and the last one, it's very short. From the shortest cookbook that contains only 44 recipes. It's from Damascus, and it's called Tutmaj. And it's a very, you see, we don't even have the original manuscript. It's lost today. So this is the edition. And it's just called to roll a dough. It's a fresh noodles, cut it into squares, cook it in water, put yogurt, mint, garlic, clarified butter, and fried meat. And the most important point here is that Tutmaj is Mongol in Mongolian. So for Mongolia. So it's coming all the way and taken, at least in the name, into Assyrian cookbook. So you see how it really preserved many cultures that today there are no cookbooks in Mongolian from this period, for example. And that's it. Thank you very much.